Alright, this is Stephen Paul making another video for Runlunds.com, and today I'm going to continue my kind of series on what I'm doing to improve my game at poker, and hope that you guys are happy to learn along with me. So the last couple of videos I did were looking at turnover bets, and I mentioned, especially going through the hand histories, that there were a few spots where I was still kind of using the 1/3 as my standard size on the flop, but that was something I was looking to improve, and so we're going to do that now. And so I've taken a slightly different situation. I think almost all of the videos I've done have been button versus big blind. I thought it might be good to mix it up a little bit. So we're going to be playing an early position open, which I've used this range right here, which again, I think is reasonable. As always, there's going to be a little room to quibble around the edges. And I've used a big blind defending range that looks like this, through betting a lot of the suited, kind of connected-y stronger hands, and mixing a little bit with some of the weaker hands. Again, as always, room to quibble. And I've run just 16 flops. Now, you could do a lot more than this, but I want enough that I can kind of play against the solution and get some different spots, but not so many that I struggle to kind of put it all together. So we're going to work through this. I'll show you guys the tree that I've used. Also, you might notice I'm using GTO Plus. I've recently bought it, so if I have some technical difficulties, please forgive me. But I did think it was useful to kind of show different softwares. I have only given the one size on the flop. It may be that I come back later and decide, hey, I don't want to use 3/4 on one of these flops. But again, I'm looking for some kind of general rules and heuristics to use. I'm not too worried about the super specifics of, is this size optimal on this flop? That's something I'll get to later. So I've given one size on the flop. If we bet, I've given a raise, and I think there's a 3-bet in there as well. You can see here. If it does go bet call, I've given two sizes for in position on the turn, so kind of a 75% pot and an overbet. As I've talked about in previous videos, you definitely do want to have an overbet on a lot of flops, and then I've given two sizes on the river as well. And then in the check line, I've tried to make it a fairly big tree, give lots of options to both players. So I've got three sizes here being used, kind of a 33% little stab, 75% pot, and then an overbet as well, and similar settings on the river. So I think that's it for the setup, and we're just going to basically play against the solution. And this is one thing that, Simple Bow Swap has Simple GTO Trainer, which seems useful, but GTO Plus comes with this natural built-in thing, so let's give that a go. We are going to be the in-position player, and I'm going to play through the whole hand. I think it's useful not only to see what I want to do on the flop, but also what I'm looking to do on turns and rivers as well. So we started here with a not particularly obvious one on the 10-4-3. So this is a hand that if we were betting small, I would bet this hand a lot. We have backdoor straight draws. Our hand benefits hugely from protection. When we bet the bigger size, I suspect we do some checking with this hand, and I would expect it to kind of go the higher the pair, the slightly more checking we do. With a 67 here, so I would, in order for me to bet here, I would have to say that I'm betting more than 67% of the time. I suspect it's probably less than that, probably more in like the 50% range. And so after I make a guess, I'm going to push control here. That'll just flash the solution up. I'm still going to make the wrong play if I suggest the wrong play, but I do want to check my intuitions on percentages. And luckily we started pretty well here. Check 45% of the time. So we'll go ahead and do that. And I would expect to be continuing on most turn cards. I imagine there are some turn cards that are good for our range where if we face a large bet we'd fold, but I'm not checking here to give up or anything like that. On the 5 we face a turn check. Again, this is a hand that I think probably will do some mixing. We can get some value from some 3x, 4x, 5x. We have good equity when we are behind, but it's also a hand that can definitely just check and get to showdown. I think if I were to bet, I would not use overbet. I would be shocked if overbet is used much here at all. It's not a particularly strong board, especially after we've checked the flop, for the in-position player. So it's a question of how often do I want to bet this hand. I would lean, personally, more towards checking it than betting it. That said, I do think it'll be bet sometimes, so I think with the 19 I will go ahead and bet it. I doubt it gets bet too much more often than that. So that's interesting, actually. I'm quite surprised that overbet gets used at all here. It looks like my intuition wasn't too far off. So we go ahead and bet and get called. I think on most rivers, I don't think I would be value betting this hand. I think you'll play against a lot of villains who are pretty capped when they take this check call line, to the point where, say the river was it's not a lot of like huge blanks. Say the river was a 10, I guess, where I would want to value bet, certainly pocket 9s and pocket 8s, probably even on a 3 or a 4 as well. But I think 6s is probably not strong enough to value bet on both rivers. Now, obviously, we've rivered a straight here, which is a much better hand. We have a spade blocker. which lessens the number of flushes he's going to have. So this is like a super clear value bet. I'm just trying to decide if I want to overbet in this spot. I think our hand probably is strong enough to overbet. We're going to have some candidates to overbet bluff. I still feel like on the flush river, he is also very much not capped. So I don't expect to see a ton of overbets here. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it's going to be 100% regular bet. If I'm wrong and there's a bunch of overbets, I wouldn't be shocked. But it looks like reasonable. Similar EV, and the overbet does get used some. But I would expect the overbet to be a little bit more polarized than 6x. And he bombs it versus the bet. I think if we don't have a spade, I think it's an easy fold. I think with a spade, we probably need to call, maybe always, and certainly more than 35% of the time. So I will call. I have been known to be a little bit of a station, though, so we'll see if Solution disagrees. And Solution does disagree quite a bit. So I suspect we're guaranteed folding without a spade. It looks like we do some calling with the 6 of spades, but I'm getting a little carried away, never folding it. I'm always curious to check. I guess we're going to call, so we'll see. But yeah, and I think that's a totally reasonable hand to turn into a bluff. Okay, Ace-King on 10-4-3. Again, and I think the reason I've gotten into the habit of using the small size is that the small size works extremely well here against opponents who don't check raise aggressively enough, because you basically buy yourself 2 cheap cards, you get some protection. Sure, you're not doing great against the range that calls you, but you're not doing terribly either. But the problem is when people start check raising a bunch, a lot of those benefits of that small size go away a little bit. I still think you'd see small size used on this flop with a reasonable frequency. I think using the big size, this is a hand I would mostly be checking. I think you see the overcard hands bet a fair bit. Usually they want a little something to go along with them, or the weaker ones. This one has some showdown value, so I'd expect it to be mostly a check. With a 40, I'm going to check, but we'll see if it ever does get bet. Looks like I'm overdoing it a little bit. This might just be strong enough for our range so that we can bet a little more, and maybe if it's a little more connected, we do more checking. Not a big mistake to check, though. Facing a check again, I would be shocked if we ever bet. I see absolutely no reason to bet. We will go ahead and check. And hopefully, there we go. So facing a bet here, I think we basically are going to call all our 1-pair hands, and then we probably have to sometimes do some hero calling. I don't think there's much point in using this. I don't see any reason to use this hand in particular as a bluff raise. So I am basically debating call and fold, and I think I would mostly fold in this spot. Again, this might be one of those where when I am playing, my opponents will likely just bet all of their straight draws on the turn, and I think are a little more weighted towards the 8x and 4x and 3x type hands when they don't lead, as well as maybe like some, ace-7 type hands. So I think I would lean very much toward folding. I'd expect the solver to sometimes call here, but I'm going to fold. Looks like, my read on the situation is somewhat reasonable. Take a look. I think that's a totally reasonable hand to get here with as villain, but I do think you'll see a lot of villains, especially in lower stakes games, kind of the regulars be like, well, I have a gut shot, that's a good hand to lead against a capped range. So, next hand. Okay, ace-jack on ace-7-6 two-tone. We don't have a diamond, so this is a hand that's certainly strong enough to value bet. I would expect it to get checked back some of the time. I would lean towards mostly betting. I think with a 60, I would bet. I think the weaker aces, I would start to check a little more, but I think ace-jack is strong enough where I would be mostly betting. So a little more checking than I would have guessed, but at least on the right track, and get a fold. Ace-6 on 10-9-2. So this is a hand with the backdoor flush draw. I think we're going to be betting sometimes, not always. I did mean to actually show, maybe I'll just tell you. If you look at the c-betting frequencies on the boards, most of them, I think the average across all boards was something like 55 to 60% bet for in position. And there's one board in particular which has a very high bet frequency. It's the ace-king, I think it's ace-king 5 rainbow. But the others kind of are all in that 40 to 65 range, if that is helpful. So, I would bet this hand some of the time. I think with a 14, it's an easy bet. I would probably, mix this somewhere in the 60-40 range. Looks like I'm doing a little too much betting. Not too worried about it. We get the king of spades turn. So, this is a card where Villain will have check raised a reasonable amount of his queen jack on the flop, but he still has a decent number of the straights. As we talked about in my turnover betting, I'm mostly looking to overbet on cards where the nuts are relatively unchanged. So this is not a card I would look to do much overbetting on. Villain has lots of 2 pairs, a reasonable number of straights, to the point where I think we're better off using the smaller sides when we bet. This is a pretty good bluff candidate. It's not something I would bluff all the time, but I think it's a card that you want, or a hand that you want to barrel most of the time. We've rolled a 99, so this particular time I will check, but I would expect to see a pretty high betting frequency. That's a little bit lower than I expected, only 60%. But again, we do see no overbets here, so it's nice to see that heuristic has worked. I think one thing that's easy to do in these spots is to over barrel, because that the barrel is profitable. The problem is that the check is also very profitable, right? We have 20% equity in a 1250 pot, so the check is worth at least 250, and that's ignoring any implied odds, any bets that we're going to get on a spade river. So I think it's very easy to overdo it with the barreling your draws. Remember that draws have EV when they check as well. Facing the overbet, I don't think there's any point in calling this hand. I think we'll have many better calling candidates, and yeah, you can see that calling is a huge mistake. I guess raising is worse, or is better than calling, but not a hand I would use to bluff raise either. See if we got bluffed. Pocket 3s. Yes, we did. Alright, King 8 of clubs on Ace Jack 9. So this is a board that is somewhat favorable for us. We have all of the aces, all of the jacks, and all of the 9s, and Villain has a few jacks. I think I gave 25% of the pocket jacks combinations, and I think all of the 9s combinations. So we have a slight advantage in sets. It's a board I expect to see a c-bet reasonably often. That said, we will definitely have some checkbacks too. We have a lot of natural checks here with backdoor flush or backdoor straight draw. I would probably just err on the side of always betting this. We'll probably see a checkback sometimes, but I'm going to bet. Again, I'm probably going a little overboard with my bets. I don't see any reason to continue this one. And indeed, I'm curious what kind of hands we see from Villain money check raises. Ace Jack, totally reasonable, of course. All right, jacks with a diamond. We are definitely going to do a decent amount of checking with overpairs on this kind of board. It's a board where on many runouts we cannot go 3 streets. That said, jacks need a little more protection than our stronger overpairs. We also have a diamond, which gives us a little better equity when called. So I would bet this most of the time. With a 15, I think it's an easy bet, but I mean, if you made me maybe give a number, I'll say like 75%, even more, 97. So just always bet this hand. You will see some checking with the bigger pairs. On the ace turn, again, this is not a turn I would use the overbet. Villain's going to have a decent amount of ace X, and especially the ace 9, ace 8 type hands. Ace 4, although I guess he doesn't have any of the offsuit ones pre-flop. But still, not a card I would really be overbetting. As far as whether we want to value bet this hand, I think it is somewhat close. We'll probably be betting it some of the time, but I would lean towards checking. So I think with a 38, I think I will check, but I think it's relatively close. Wow. So way off. That's interesting. That is a lot of barreling, so we must... Maybe I will stop and take a look at this one. Give me a second while I figure out how to do that. Okay, so here you can just see that our particular hand, this particular turn is just so good for our range that we bet basically everything. You can see we check back basically our 9x, a tiny bit of ace X, an occasional give up type hand, and a little bit of the showdown value stuff. But the card is just so good for our range that we can go ahead and bet everything. You can see though, at least we got one part right, in that there is no overbetting on this card. But yeah, just a very clear bet. You can see we get some protection with our jacks. We get a few overcards to fold. We get some 9x to fold. We get some 8x to fold. Let's see. Looks like the draws are not doing a whole lot of folding, although I guess these are mostly diamond draws. And then we do get some value as well. We get a bunch of 9x to call, a little bit of 8x to call. And yeah, I guess because of the situation where Big Blind doesn't have any of the offsuit aces, there's just less ace X than I had initially thought. And yeah, I mean, that's just a product of being used to doing these button versus Big Blind spots. But that's interesting. Okay, so that's something I got very wrong. So we'll come back here, but I did plan to check. Check is something that's occasionally used, so let's see how the river plays out when we check. I would imagine had we bet, and maybe at the end I'll try to replay this hand, because if we bet, I would assume we're just always checking back on a river like this. And do we want to value bet? I suspect we probably do when villain checks back. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and bet, make sure that's reasonable. And no, it looks like once we check the turn, well, we can occasionally value bet, but it's not a great play. We do get looked up light there. How do I... Alright, I'm going to reset this so we can play it again, and I just want to make sure that we are indeed checking back rivers. Alright, well, spoiler alert, I lost the hand and can't get it back, but yes, indeed we would check back most rivers, not surprisingly. Okay, we get the King 9-2 flop, and we have pocket queens. So this is a hand I would expect to see occasionally bet. It's a nice check back in that it doesn't need much in the way of protection, but it's a board that I would expect us to be c-betting a lot. So I expect we'll see some betting frequency, but I think this particular hand will do a lot of checking. So I'm going to go ahead and check with a 63, and looks like we can just always check. Not a big EV difference, or no EV difference between checking and betting, but with the 3/4 size, we just go ahead and always check. Do we want to value bet the turn? We do have blockers to his strongest hands, and we picked up a gut shot, so we have a little better equity when we get called and are behind. That said, I would expect us to check most of the time. We rolled a 23. Do I want to bet 23% of the time or more? I think I'm going to go ahead and check it back again. It looks like I'm a little off, but close. And on the river, I seem to be getting these odd pauses on the river. We get a check, and now I think our hand is pretty clearly strong enough to value bet. Do we want to overbet? I don't think our hand is strong enough to overbet. And I doubt we'll do a ton of overbetting, so I'm just going to go ahead and make the standard value bet. And it looks like, so this is another one where I think villains in game will just not do a good enough job of checking enough King X. I think you will see them value betting enough that the queens will be a clear value bet here. Looks like it's pretty close against our GTO villain here, despite us getting called quite light still. Okay, top pair and a flush draw. Definitely strong enough hand to value bet. We probably do a little bit of checking back, but I think with a 10 we're going to see a very easy bet. See, it's roughly split. We get a fold. So this is the board I talked about earlier. This is a very high c-bet board for us, and we have a very good bluffing candidate. We block his strongest aces, and we have a gutter to the nuts. So I'd expect to basically always c-bet this. I did roll a 97, but I'm still going to bet. Looks like that is correct. Get a fold. Very high EV for board for us, obviously. We have a fairly tight range, and we have all of the strongest hands, and he has none of them. So that's always going to be a good spot. Pretty good hand as far as c-betting goes. Back in the old days when you had your rules about what to c-bet, I mean, this ticks all the boxes, right? We don't have a strong hand. We don't have much in the way of showdown value. We have a gut shot. We have backdoor hearts. So I'd expect this to be c-bet quite a bit, but not always. I think, again, we see as the more I play with solvers, the more you see that those hands that were kind of typical always semi-bluff these, they do get checked back sometimes, but nonetheless, I would expect with a 32, this will be an easy bet. And I am barely right. 35% bet. Yeah, so I mean, I guess that just goes to show, I think part of the problem is I used to feel like in these spots that if I check and then I face I get a blank turn and I face a bet, I have to fold. But I think that's not necessarily the case. I mean, there are plenty of turns where you have an easy continue. And then there are other turns where, we still have a bunch of ace X after we check back this flop. It's not a flop where we have a super high c-bet percentage. Why don't we check and see what it is? Ace 10 6. We are c-betting just 45% of the time. So we have plenty of strong hands that are going to check it back. And so when we check the flop, it's okay to have some, weakish draws that call the turn as well, with the chance to either make the nuts or to bluff on the river. So it's not that a bet is bad by any means, but it is nice to know this is a hand that can definitely be checked back. We get a fold. Again, this one fits the categories nicely, right? We got two overs, we got an open ender, and we've got backdoor flush draw. Clicks all the boxes for we want to c-bet it. I do expect it to occasionally get checked back, but 28 I'm going to definitely bet. And you can see that this one is indeed mostly bet. Obviously, we'd continue against a raise if we faced one. So this one at first glance is similar to the queens that we saw on the King 9-2 in that we have, we have the overpair to second pair. I think we should be a little more inclined to bet this one than the last one just because of the advantages of, this hand needs a lot more protection. We get some hands with 2 overs to fold and tons of hands with a 1 over to fold. Whereas on the other hand, with the queens, we check 2 streets and we let our opponent make a pair and got a value bet out of it. So this one I would do a reasonable amount of betting. I think with the 12, definitely I would bet. Probably somewhere in like the 60% range. Again, I'm getting a little carried away with the c-bets. I'm not surprised by that. I think one of the problems of getting so used to using the 1/3 sizing is that you just end up c-betting too much. Especially when you're playing opponents who don't attack your c-bets as well as maybe they should. It is easy to get away with careless c-betting. So something to work on. With a 12, still a bet, but I was getting a little carried away. Get a fold. We should expect to see a fair number of folds from villain, just because of the fact that we're using a big size. I think you see, again, if you average across the 16 flops we're working with here, I think you see something like 55% folds. We talked about this in a previous video, but Big Blind does not need to defend MDF or anything like it. We have profitable checkbacks with every hand, and so villain is not trying to make a 0 EV with his defending strategy. He's just trying to make some particular hand indifferent between betting and checking. So don't expect villain to defend anything close to MDF. Okay, similar spot to the King Queen of Hearts. I think this was the exact board we had King Queen of Hearts on, where I got a little carried away with c-betting. Here rolling a 92, I'd expect to check this back. But again, fairly high frequency bet would have been my assumption, and that is reasonable. On the queen turn, I certainly don't think we're going to fold, getting this price. Do we ever want to raise? I don't think so. I would basically always call here. And with a 98, I'm going to go ahead and call. Looks like you can occasionally use it as a bluff raise, but it's a very low frequency thing. We're going to bet a lot of our king jack, certainly not all, as we've seen, but we're going to have bet a lot of our king jack, and a lot of our ace queen type hands, and villain does have those hands. So anyways, we go ahead and call. River is at 10, and villain bets. We do have a blocker to king jack. Villain does not have all of the king 10, queen 10, jack 10 combos. Offsuit ones, sorry. And I think they 3-bet some of the suited ones as well. That said, I think we just have a lot of better bluff catchers than this. Is there any reason to turn this hand into a bluff? We do have a blocker to king jack, but I'm not thrilled with that. The queen is a little nice because it blocks some boats. I think it's probably a very low frequency play if it happens, and we would probably use the very big size. I'm just going to fold this in with a 66. And I am a little over foldy, I guess. Looks like our intuition about the raises was reasonable, that if we're going to raise, it should be the big size. I was definitely under bluff raising here. They're using this hand 25%, so I'd guess it's one of our better choices. But interesting that it's an always call. I'm curious. Okay, I'm gonna try to do this right. I just want to kind of flip through some different hands we can have and see what they do here. Mostly because I want to know what we're folding if we're calling 100% of our king queens. So 8-7 of spades, obviously that's going to be an easy fold. Ace 3. So I wonder actually if king queen ends up being a better bluff catcher than ace 3. I don't think it should be, though. I mean, we have the blocker to king jack, which I guess is quite valuable. But I would think the ace blocker is a little better than the queen blocker. But we do actually fold this hand some of the time, call some of the time. Kings. Again, that seems similar in terms of bluff catcher value to the king queen, but we actually are doing a bunch of folding with this hand. I don't want to spend too much time on this. This one's obviously a super easy raise. King jack, I wonder. I would imagine we do some raising. Actually, 0 raising. I'll call. Okay, so I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on this one, but that is interesting that the king queen, the king blocker is a little more useful than the ace. So that is interesting. You see villain value bets as light as ace queen. So anyway, let us move on. Okay, I think we're going to get a new turn this time. No, I'm wrong. Okay, I'm going to pause one more time and try to get a new turn. All right. Sometimes you just got to admit defeat. Sometimes the software is smarter than you. So we're going to use the ace. We saw already that basically all hands get bet here, so we'll go ahead and bet, and we get a fold. All right, 7-6 of clubs. Again, if you kind of follow the old rules, we have a backdoor straight draw, we have a backdoor flush draw, and that would lean me towards c-betting. And we also have 0 showdown value at all. And so I do expect this one to be a fairly high frequency c-bet. That said, we kind of do block some of the hands that we would like to have fold a little bit. But that said, I'm going to go ahead and bet with the 74. Getting carried away again. We turn a bad version of an open-ender on a flush draw board. Obviously, the 10 is not a great card, and there's a chance we're going to be drawing dead. I think with a 78, we're probably just checking it back and taking our little bit of equity here. I probably gets bluffed sometimes. I would say never with the overbet. Not a spot I would be overbetting basically anything, but I expect this one to be checked. Okay, so yeah. I mean, reasonable with my RNG number. I was probably giving up a little too much here. And it's a spot where we definitely are going to have some bet check bets. We have a bunch of, Queen X, even some kings and aces that are going to check back and are going to be strong enough to bet the river. Also, you will see some slow playing from in position here with flushes. Here, I just cannot imagine a worse hand we could have. So I think I'm going to go ahead and bluff, certainly with the 18. We don't have any useful blockers in terms of, stopping him from having calling hands, but I still think it will be a bluff, and I am wrong. Turns out the blockers are valuable enough here. So again, I want to go through this exercise of just flipping through a few hands and seeing what we are bluffing with here. So Queen 10, I would expect is a value bet. Wow. Small blind, or big blind is tricky. This seems like an easy check. This seems, well, I mean, if a 10 is a check, then this is a check. I'd expect that to be a check against most opponents as well. Do we want to turn a jack into a bluff? I don't think so. Nope. Check it back and take your tiny bit of showdown value. Here we have a heart. So this is the kind of hand I'm interested in. If, I would expect this hand to also have 0 showdown value. So probably be a better bluff than the 7-6 of clubs. And you can see that, so this one is used as a bluff sometimes. 10-9, presumably. Okay, so this one, that's interesting because the first one was Queen 10. And the Queen is just a worse card in terms of blocking some of his calling range. So here you can see that we are value betting some 10s. Whoops, pushed the wrong button. We are value betting some 10s, but not the ones that block his calling range, which makes a ton of sense. All right, so let's check this last hand and then we'll move on. Ace 9. So we do want some kind of useful blocker to bluff here. We have tons of no showdown value hands, just because a lot of the weaker pairs have no showdown value. All right, pocket 9s here. I would expect to be a very high frequency check. I don't think a ton of good stuff happens when we bet. We don't have a club, so we don't have that extra little bit of equity. Our hand does need some protection, so probably it gets bet occasionally, but I would expect very high frequency check, and actually 100% check seems to be the answer. Facing a bet on the turn, we do block some of his semi-bluffs, which is unfortunate. All of the gut shots and some of the higher straight draws as well. We also have a diamond, so none of these are positive things. Do we want to be folding a hand as strong as this ever? I suspect this will be a very high frequency call, so I'm going to go ahead and call. We'll take a look. Okay, interesting. A little too carried away, so I guess the blockers here are just bad enough. And our hand is bad enough. We're checking back enough stronger hands that we can go ahead and mostly fold this. It's not a terrible mistake to call, but it is, basically same EV, but if we call this hand, we're just calling too much, I guess. We'll go ahead and make the play, though, and I don't see any reason to do anything but check here. Sure, we block some 9-8, but I don't think that's a good enough reason. We'll take our tiny bit of showdown value and check it back. Okay, ace-queen, a similar spot to where we had ace-king before. So a hand that I do think we will be betting some of the time and checking back probably more than 50%, but with a 30 I'm going to go ahead and bet. Looks like, again, a little off, but close enough. Do we ever want to bet on a 4-turn? I see no reason to, so I'm going to check here. Again, we're certainly not getting worse hands to call. We'll get a little protection in terms of getting some gut shots to fold. We might occasionally get a better hand to fold. And that's, it's easy to talk yourself into those bets, but the problem is that very often we're going to put in a bet, and a fairly sizable bet, with very bad equity. And we do still have a little bit of showdown value and some outs to improve when we check it back. So we'll go ahead and check. I think it was 100%. Yep. And so on a blank, we would have to sometimes, I would expect us to sometimes hero call. On the ace, I think this is a pretty clear value bet. Yeah, I don't think there's much to say here. Bet, hope, and hope you don't get raised, I think is the way to go. Fairly connected flop, and we do not connect with it in any way. So our blockers here are not great. We do have the backdoor flush draw. So I do think we'll bet some of the time, but I think with the 73, I will go ahead and check. Looks reasonable. Turn a 4. Do we want to continue on the 4? I think we probably do. We have 5 quite clean outs, and we have absolutely no blockers to any of his bluffs, which is always good. Kings, queens, 10s, 8s, 7s, 5s would all be kind of slight negatives, and diamonds, and we don't have any of those, so this will probably be a pure call. It looks like we even sometimes raise it, which is not a play I would have considered, but we'll go ahead and call. And on the 10 of diamonds, we would not be calling a bet, because now all of a sudden all the good blocker properties we had on the turn have turned into negative blocker problems on the river. Obviously now we would want a diamond, we would want a king or a queen, but we don't have those things. Do we want to bluff our hand? I suspect we do. Certainly I expect to have essentially 0 EV as a check back, so then it's just a question of how, are we going to have too many bluffs if we bluff? Because our hand does not, as I mentioned, does not have any useful blocker effects in terms of, blocking hands of his that will call. If we do bluff, I would expect us to probably use the smaller size. Again, I think that we will have some bigger sizings on this river, but we would like to choose hands that have some positive blocker effect, I think, to bet bigger. With a 28, I think I'm going to bluff, but probably we have to give up some of the time. And actually, I guess we have to give up all of the time. Not an enormous, well, it's a pretty big mistake. Minus 0.26. Okay, so interesting. I guess we'll just have enough other stuff. Maybe I'll flick through some of the other hands we get here with so we can get a sense for what those bluffs are. But yeah, you can see that, at least our intuition about no showdown value is right. We basically never win when we check. But here it's just best to totally give up. Pocket 10 is obviously going to be a bet. Wow. These solvers so tricky that we can't even value bet a set of 10s. 2 pair gets checked back always. I'm just trying to find a hand that's going to bluff. King 9, so this has a... I would say this has a tiny bit of showdown value though, but it's not a very big amount of showdown value, and it does have a blocker. And so you can see this one occasionally gets bet. A little more checking. I think we'll be betting that hand. I would assume we're betting that hand, yes. I have yet to find a bluff, so maybe this one will get turned into a bluff. It does block the 8-7 straight. And so yeah, actually this one is basically always turned into a bluff. 6-5 also. So again, we're getting into the more subtle effects when ace-4 gets checked, but 6-5 gets bet. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. Suffice it to say, you're going to have to take some pairs and turn them into bluffs. And you need to be a little careful if your opponent is good about how thin you value bet. Those are the 2 lessons I would take from this one. Sure, we'll take the mistake. Okay, similar-ish spot. I think with an 11, we're going to go ahead and bet. Take a look. Pretty high frequency bet. Get the fold. Maybe we'll go through... Let's go through maybe 5 more hands. We'll try to get one more interesting spot. Again, this is going to be kind of a mix. With a 41, I'm going to bet. But it's close. Roughly 50-50. This I would expect to be a fairly high frequency check. We do want to have some Jack X in our betting range, so I don't think it'll be 100%, but probably pretty close to it with this particular one. Yeah, so more betting than I would have expected, but still a high frequency check back. Very good card for our hand and reasonable card for our range. Do I want to overbet in this spot? I don't think so. I think these paired spots tend to run into the kind of same blocker effects you see on flush boards, where when we have trips, they are much less likely to have trips, and when we don't have trips, they are much more likely to have trips. So I think I would just use the smaller size here, near 100% frequency. So tricksy, checking back more than or about half the time. I'm pretty happy to bet that, but that is interesting. Okay, Ace Jack with a 17, I'm going to go ahead and bet. We've seen this before. It's going to be a mix. This one looks to be predominantly bet. Facing a check raise, I suspect this is just going to be a pure fold. We have rolled a 2 though, so if we're ever going to call it, this is the time. I think though I would wait more for hands with pairs or backdoor flush draws or something going for them. You probably on this board can't get away with folding all of your overcards all of the time, but I don't see anything about ace jack in particular that leads me to want to call it, and so good to see that it is a pure fold. Maybe I'll flick through a few hands here and we'll see what we would continue. Ace 4 diamonds seems like a clear continue. Even 3-betting sometimes. Actually, 3-betting a lot of the time. That blocker to a set and the backdoor flush draw really lends itself to that. This seems like a toughish spot. With the backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, I'd expect to see some calling here. No, actually none. Okay, interesting. I guess not having the over is a pretty big downside. This will be a call with a gutter. This should be a fold. Again, so I'm curious to see, now that we don't have the backdoor flush draw, if we're still ever 3-betting this. Certainly I would expect us to 3-bet it less if we do. And this one looks like we can do basically anything. Set, a little bit of both. Obvious fold. Probably a fold. Easy fold. Easy fold. And a hand like ace 10, probably a call. Interesting, this is something I don't think you're going to see a whole lot, the 3-bet with ace 10. That's an interesting play. Definitely continuing and some 3-betting. So this is the spot I think, and maybe I'll end on this and look into this a little bit. But I think this is a spot that I am not playing anything close to what Solver is playing. Given the amount of 3-betting we see, I think I would probably have defaulted to playing no 3-bet whatsoever on this flop. And so maybe we'll take a look first at what big blind is raising, and then we'll take a look at what we're 3-betting. So you can see a little bit of the ace 10s. Looks like the sets are predominantly raising. The 2 pairs are roughly mixed. The overpairs, the overpair, I guess, we only have jacks, right? Yeah. Overpairs occasionally raising. And then when we get into the 10s, you actually see a decent amount of raising from the 10x. In particular, the 10-9 club seems to be raising quite a lot. It looks like the ones without backdoor flush draws are a little more inclined to raise for the most part, but a fair bit of raising from this 10x region. And I would guess that's what kind of drives our desire to have a 3-betting range. Some gut shots, pretty frequently with the gut shots, and a little bit of the 1-pair hands along with most of the sets, as I mentioned. Okay. And then facing a raise, obviously we're never folding any overpairs. Looks like we very rarely fold any pairs at all. Pocket 5s being the one exception. Obviously we're never folding any of our draws. Do any of the overs call? It looks like just a little bit. The overs with the backdoor flush draw are kind of mixing, although still leaning towards folding. So I might have been over defending a little bit in this spot. Again, that's probably just because I'm used to making the small size with a huge chunk of my range where you need to start defending a little bit more. Whereas when you only c-bet, 2/3 of the time instead of 85-90% of the time, you can get away with folding some slightly stronger hands, obviously. Okay, so what does our 3-betting range look like? Obviously those set blockers are very valuable. You can see it happens quite often with the ace 4 and the ace 3. Both doing a lot of raising. If you're not used to looking at GTO Plus, sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier. You can see here on this left side of the screen here, they will show you the hands and then the frequencies with which they're doing them. So I think there's a way for me to freeze it. Yeah, technical difficulties. But anyways, as I mouse over ace 4, you can see that ace 4 diamonds is 3-betting 65% of the time, calling 35% of the time, and never folding. So if you hadn't used it and didn't know what I was talking about when I was giving numbers, that's how you do it there. A little bit of so we are a little more likely to continue with overcards that have kind of the better backdoor straight draws. So you can see a hand like Queen Jack suited with the backdoors is never. Queen Jack suited in particular is almost never folding with backdoors. King Jack suited and King Queen suited mixing. And yeah, all of our overpairs are getting 3-bet with some frequency. And so we're just willing to get it in on this board with those hands. And then, yeah, our 10x is mostly calling. It's really just the ace 10 that is strong enough. and then we mix with our sets. So this is something that yeah, I mean, when you get to the point where a big chunk of the money is going in, and is likely to go in against some hands, we do start to see some slow playing of the sets, which I think in some ways is a counterintuitive result, that we can see kind of some weaker hands being willing to get it in, but the sets just calling. And I mean, I guess maybe it's not that counterintuitive, but I think my first inclination when building a 3-betting range would be to build it around the sets. But you can see that they're, not surprisingly, very happy to slow play on a board like this as well. Just out of curiosity, we'll take a very quick look. Looks like when we do 3-bet, we see some heroic plays from Big Blind, occasionally jamming in a hand like Ace-2 suited or 6-5 suited, and then this, the two pairs. The two pairs obviously a great hand because it blocks the sets and has very good equity against some of our get-it-in hands, and jamming a little bit of the sets as well. And we are just basically calling off with the good hands and mostly folding the less good hands, although occasionally, apparently you gotta be a hero. Get in 100 big blinds on 10-4-3 rainbow with ace-4. I'm going to avoid doing that. And I think on that note, I will call it a video. Any thoughts you have on videos you'd like to see or any comments on this video, please leave in the comments. And I look forward to talking to you. This has been Steve Paul for Ones.com. Thanks for watching.